if you're one of those people who just hit their stretch goal, like you've been working on a project for, say, the last few months, or maybe it's been a few years, and you're like, yes, I should be feeling amazing, but then you're like, wait, but why do I feel so shitty? Like, why do I feel down? I mean, I just finished the thing that I desired the most. And I just want to say that it is abso-freaking-lutely normal to feel like this. Yeah, it's actually kind of normal to feel shitty after accomplishing your stretch goal. And the reason for this, there's actually a term that psychologists call it the post-performance depression, okay? Which I prefer to call it post-project blues. It does come similarly to the idea of postpartum depression, right? After you give birth, sometimes women, they do go through this drop, and there are a lot of physical responses for this, right? There's differences in hormones, in our neurotransmitters, etc. And this is the same thing that happens to us when we are working on a project that we've been doing, and think about all that adrenaline that we've been using to make it to our stretch goal. It's completely normal, and I do want to say that there are ways to get through it. So first, for those of you who don't know me, I want to introduce myself. I am Genevieve, and I'm a storyteller, and I like to tell stories through words, photos, and a touch of tarot. And I recently wrote a book. It's called Yes to It All. It's a memoir, and so I know exactly how you are feeling, because when I finished Yes to It All, you'd think that I would be jumping up and down, but actually I was just laying in bed thinking, oh my gosh, what else am I gonna do? Now I'm done, I had this listlessness. And so I wanted to share with you some of the common symptoms that happen when post-project blues include feeling exhausted, burnt out, feeling down, uninspired, unmotivated. I mean, these are just some of the common things, like where you just really don't want to do anything. And in fact, you may not even feel like celebrating, right? You're like, now what, right? And that's a big question mark to fill, right? You're just, especially when you've given so much of your energy. And so first off, I want to say, congratulations, celebrate your ass off. And if that means celebrating by sleeping, do it by all means, because there is actually a physiological response that happens. So if you think about like all of that adrenaline that was keeping you going, right? It's kind of like how, a mother who has their child stuck under a car, they are able to muster all of their adrenaline to lift the car, right? You've heard these stories of adrenaline, and that's essentially, over the course of a project, whether, it was writing your next screenplay, or, you were submitting something for your client, that's a lot of stress, and it may be something that you're really passionate about. So I don't mean stress in a bad way, but it is some sort of tax on the body, and it does take a toll. And with that, right, there is some sort of, as you're going up the high, right, and you make it to the top, there's also going to be a come down. It's basically like a drug, right? That's what drugs do, right? It's the manipulation of neurotransmitters, and that's essentially what's happening. So it's completely normal, and it's physiological. And so one thing is, I do say rest, and then there are two other things. The two things that have really helped me get back with a fire under my ass is, one, I went back to The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. I first read this book in 2015, and this book really changed my life. When 2015, I was really depressed. I had suicidal depression, and this book actually quite literally saved my life. So the book is about essentially the premise of having and establishing a really, really solid morning ritual. Hal Elrod, he outlines something called SAVERS. So it literally was saving my life. And the SAVERS, it is an acronym for S as in silence, A as in affirmations, V as in visualization, E as in exercise, R as in read, and S as in scribe. So if you do all of these things and you do them 10 minutes each, you have 60 minutes in total of self-care, right? That's a morning routine. So Hal recommends doing 10 minutes of each, which gives you 60 minutes in total. But I've actually done it, on the days that I don't have an hour. Sometimes I've done 5 minutes of each. So 5 minutes I will sit in silence and then 5 minutes I'll read my affirmations, I'll visualize, exercise, read, and then scribe, meaning write. I'll write for 5 minutes. And I decided to get back to basics, and I got back onto doing the miracle morning, and within a week I was already starting to feel like, okay, all right, I have something that I'm gonna wake up for, something that I'm gonna do, and if I don't do anything else, at least I have taken care of the most basic needs that are important. Also, recently came out with a documentary on the miracle morning, which I watched recently, and it's great. So if you don't have time to read, you can at least watch the documentary. It's free. I will also put that in the description below. My second piece of advice, and that has really helped me, and I would say doing this anytime, all the time. It doesn't matter if you're going through the blues. I actually recommend it as a prescriptive measure, is the Osho Kundalini meditation. Now, before you start rolling your eyes because you're like, one, last time I heard Osho was a little dodgy, and two, you're like, I do not do Kundalini and blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna break it down to you. Essentially, it's taking some of the Qigong principles. So they probably should call it Qigong, but the Qigong principle of shaking, right? You shake for 15 minutes. And the idea of shaking actually is to release tension in the body, right? Because we carry a lot of stress in our body. And on top of that, it's to create circulation in the body. In traditional Chinese medicine, the idea is that stagnation is what causes disease, right? If you think about a swamp, right, it grows all this bacteria and this fungus and this moss and all of this stuff and the algae. It grows because there's stagnation. There's no water moving through. And so shaking helps us. Also, we've seen physiologically with animals, like for example, you may have seen your dog, they're rolling around in the grass and you think, oh, they're just itching themselves, but actually they're releasing tension. Or sometimes you see your dog go, right? Like, and they're not even wet or they're not even cold. They're doing that because that's a physiological way to equilibrize, basically come back to equilibrium in their state, regulating their bodies. Whole reason to just shake. And then following the first 15 minutes of shaking, then you have 15 minutes of free movement, aka dance. And heck, dancing is just so good for the soul, and to be able to move your body. I mean, we just know scientifically that you gotta move if you want to stay healthy. The third part is you're standing still. And this is also a Qigong practice where you just stand still, and is really tuning into the heartbeat, or feeling the energy in your body and allowing all of that movement to sort of settle, right? And so you're doing that and you're standing there for 15 minutes. And I mean, in this day and age, standing still for 15 minutes, it's a practice, right? But it's also this idea of coming back to stillness, which is the first principle or the first bullet point in Savers of the Miracle Morning, to come to stillness, to silence. And then the very, very last step, which is, you're like, oh my God, how long is this Kundalini meditation? It's actually 60 minutes. But again, like I said, you can just do 5 minutes of each of the sections. But at the very end, you do 15 minutes of rest. And isn't that what you need anyways after hitting your freaking amazing stretch goal? Yes, Coming back into these exercises and these simple practices and making that the only thing on my checklist to do, right? Just that alone saved me. And it's pretty phenomenal to think about the power of coming back to basics, to give ourselves the moment to rest and to really integrate into what has been a peak state for us, right? Same thing with professional athletes. There is a reason why, athletes don't play on the field 12 months out of the year. There's always like a little bit of downtime. And so it's critical that, if we're creatives and we're producing a lot of work that's not just, mentally taxing or physically taxing, but that it's also, soul taxing, right? We're putting ourselves out there. So all the more reason for you, if you are feeling down and you feel like, you just don't know what you want to do next, give yourself a break, literally dance a little bit, come back to maybe doing some miracle mornings, and from there, you'll be surprised. For me, I know that I got a new fire under my ass lit, and I am so excited Stay tuned because I have a new project that's coming out. It's not another book, but it is book inspired. And if you liked this video, please subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified for when I make the announcement of what my next project's gonna be. Peace out.